Every good story deals with conflict. Whether it's a simple search for something precious, or a struggle between two opposing forces, we are drawn to the efforts made to overcome. The fantasy genre in particular tells of epic clashes between titans, and the greatest of tales pit our heroes against overwhelming forces. Centered around all of it is the never-ending battle between darkness and light, an eternal conflict that inevitably brings legendary heroes into their shining glory. But what actually defines darkness and light? What makes the side that we have chosen right, and the enemies we face wrong? In games and stories, we always trust that our main character will make the correct decision for light and justice to win the day. But just because we were told someone is evil does not necessarily make it so. How do you know what is right, what is wrong, and what is just different? Shadow and light are two sides of the same coin. One cannot exist without the other. But the exact nature of those two sides may be different than what we believe. For the hero, it's up to them to learn which side of that coin they stand on, whether it be the glorious light of day or the reflective peace of night. And by understanding how those different sides help and complement each other, you create not a conquering force, but a balance that can bring peace and harmony to all. For even as the sun sets into the night, or the moon fades into the dawn, there is, for a moment, the somber, yet calming and beautiful intersection of twilight. Shortly following the announcement of Four Swords Adventure, Nintendo publicized the next major installment to The Legend of Zelda. It was planned to be a direct sequel to Wind Waker, but while the game has since become a favorite to many, Wind Waker's reception at the time was relatively modest, particularly in North America. In an effort to appeal to those hesitant to come back to the series, Nintendo moved the Wind Waker sequel to the Nintendo DS, and instead focused their main console title on a return to Hyrule. But that wasn't all they were working on. As early as 2003, Nintendo had begun designing its next home console, which would eventually become one of the biggest booms in gaming history. Even in early development, it was clear that the Nintendo Wii's motion controls were going to be a major factor in its games, and the idea of those controls in something like Zelda was far too appealing to pass on to a future title. To promote the new console, a mirrored version of the game was developed for the Wii, and this new game was presented as the series' first double release. Its title, The Legend of Zelda: Twilight Princess. The prominence of the Twilight atmosphere is readily apparent from the game's opening sequence. Link, fully grown and riding horseback, gallops across Hyrule Field at sunset, eventually giving way to a lone wolf howling at Hyrule Castle. The same tone pervades the opening sequence, as Russell observes the somber aura of sunset, as a time when the mortal world and the spirit world intersect. But despite the serious atmosphere this opening evokes, the actual setting is just as peaceful as it was in Wind Waker. Your small village of Ordon is a tight-knit community, with friendly faces and simple problems. The next few days serve as your tutorial as you learn the usual rules of combat and item use under the happy sunlight. There's a common theme in this tutorial and throughout the game that is rather unique to Twilight Princess. Before you can even go to bed on the first night, you're asked for help rounding up the village goats. No matter where you go, cats, hawks, and more create a constant interaction with the animals around you. As your adventure extends into Hyrule proper, your association with the animal kingdom expands wherever you go, from the usual fishing trip to searching for insects for Princess Agatha. Your most common animal interaction is also your first. From very early in development, an emphasis was placed on being able to properly ride and fight while on horseback, and that emphasis is carried throughout the entire game. For the first time, you're allowed to name your horse as well as your character. And your need of her expands from simple transport to escort and even rescue missions. More than just a quicker way to travel, your horse is an indispensable companion in this gritty world. In stark contrast to the cel-shaded, youthful styles of Wind Waker and Minish Cap, Twilight Princess makes a full return to the realistic style of Ocarina of Time, and then turns it up as high as it can go. The angles are sharpened, the colors and tone dimmed and flattened, creating a darker Hyrule that in many respects was exactly the kind of world that players were originally expecting when the GameCube was first announced. The graphic design has a major impact on the characters. The monsters that infest the land take on a much rougher and fiercer appearance, replacing the cute, even funny foes from the previous titles. It increases the sense of danger from even the most basic of enemies, and makes the bosses that much more terrifying. The change in style benefited the main cast as well, giving Link, Zelda, and a few others an especially dignified appearance that is unmatched by their peers. Unfortunately, the rest of the cast didn't necessarily gain the same benefit. Alongside the main Zelda company, there has always been a plethora of colorful side characters, most of which are much more suited to the childlike atmosphere of most of the series' titles. By taking such characters into a more realistic world, just like the monsters, that cuteness is replaced with a fierceness that takes away from the usual playful tone. It doesn't always create a bad effect, but often it just doesn't fit. And you're just as likely to run into a character that is the stuff of nightmares. Nightmares can easily be found on their own, and are in fact right on your doorstep. Events during the tutorial days hint that not all is right with the world. And just before you set off on an innocuous trip to Hyrule Castle, your home is invaded by dark forces who kidnap Ilia and the town's children. Giving chase across the bridge, you're met with a terrifying wall of darkness blocking your path. Before you have time to think, you're forcibly brought through by an otherworldly creature. For a moment, it seems as if Providence has saved you. But the flickering shadows and twilight aura around you quickly create uneasiness, distress, then suddenly... When you next come to, you find yourself in a derelict dungeon, chained both to the ground and to a body you have no business being in. But before you can even come to grips with your situation, you learn that you're not alone, as the shape of a shadowy imp emerges from the darkness. From her smile and her first words, it's obvious that this creature doesn't exactly care much for you. She's teasing, manipulative, and hell-bent on making you do exactly what she wants, treating you and riding you like the animal you appear to be. With no information, context, or ever even introducing herself, the imp moves you through the dungeon and across rooftops, slowly getting you used to your new form and exposing you to the spirits trapped in Twilight. Only context clues indicate that this is Hyrule Castle, and it's not confirmed until you finally meet Princess Zelda, who is being held captive in her own palace after surrendering to the dark forces that now hold all of Hyrule in its shadowy grasp. It turns out that the imp, to whom Zelda addresses as Midna, has a shared interest in this crisis and graciously offers to take command. Stealing a sword and shield from your village, the two of you begin to make your return to the Twilight, but are delayed by a voice asking for help. You are soon met with a spirit of light, who pleads with you to assist its kin, who have had their light stolen and scattered to the Twilight. We've mentioned before how Zelda likes to play with the duality of worlds. No matter the game, each alternate reality gives new perspectives and tones to experience on your adventure. Where Twilight Princess differs is that for once, the real world and the alternate world are one and the same. The darkness of Twilight covering the land places a grim shroud on the Hyrule we love. Half-visible shapes and twisted shadow beasts drive home the reality that your home is not really yours anymore. As you explore more of Hyrule, you're subjected to the Twilight version first, creating a sense that you are continually moving through enemy territory. The fact that you're a wolf doesn't help much either. Unable to use your sword and shield, and Midna with no idea how to use them, you have to rely exclusively on your teeth and animal instincts to keep you alive. Without any weapons or items, combat is reduced to simple pouncing and tearing at any enemy that comes your way. This makes fighting most enemies actually pretty easy. Nearly everything is taken down with little effort, the only exception being the larger shadow beasts that seem to be specifically sent to waylay you. Less of a battle, it's more of a puzzle, as you need to kill at least the last two at the same time. Exploration, on the other hand, is a lot more intriguing as a wolf. First, you're a lot faster, which, considering the impressive size of Hyrule, is a welcome change. And additional directions from Midna enables you to span heights and lengths that would otherwise be impossible. But if you simply sprint your way across the land, you'll miss the plethora of secrets buried just beneath your feet. Utilizing animal senses reveals sparkling bits of ground that yield buried treasure, and occasionally leads to shortcuts or entirely new areas. Your senses also allow you to see and hear other things that you normally wouldn't. Very early on, you discover the ability to sense lost spirits wandering the twilight. And while you have complete freedom to observe and manipulate the world around you, the people within Twilight are unable to detect your presence. This grants a unique perspective to the world around you, allowing you to better grasp the terror these people are facing, thus inspiring you to take action. Good thing, too, because as fate would have it, the divine light restored to the land not only releases you from your beast form, but unveils your heritage and destiny as the savior of Hyrule. With sword, shield, and your newly acquired tunic, you are set to continue the age-old quest of righting wrongs by exploring dungeons and defeating monsters. Swordplay is given a lot of love in this game. Minish Cap introduced the concept of techniques that must be learned and mastered, but Twilight Princess made those lessons and moves meaningful and dramatic. Taking direction from a skeletal spirit, you learn several ways to get past enemy defenses and look awesome doing it. While only the first technique is required for the game, each move makes combat easier and more effective. The defenses the enemies you have to overcome is impressive as well, and their ability to block your advances makes combat arguably the most difficult aspect of the game, and makes each dungeon that much more challenging. At first glance, it appears that the level designs are just revamps of previous temples. Returning to familiar locations such as the Forest Temple and Death Mountain certainly makes it seem like the level designers were just recycling old environments. But while the Kokiri emblem or Zora's Sapphire may adorn the decor, the actual dungeon layouts are much more complex, creating floor plans that expand in several directions, loop back on themselves, and basically ensure that the map and compass are going to get plenty of use. What's particularly unique, however, is the actual objective of your initial dungeon crawling. Almost always, your goal in these levels is to obtain pendants, pearls, some kind of sacred item. Even in rare cases, when you don't obtain something, there's always a feeling that you are bringing light to the world around you. Twilight Princess, however, the joy of victory is almost immediately dampened as you obtain a relic that is anything but sacred. With delight, Midna takes from you this fused shadow, something that you see creating gigantic monsters and possessing the Goron Patriarch. You go along with it, because you're told that it's the only thing that can solve this crisis. But the ominous music and the warnings of the fused shadow's power doesn't make it seem like you're doing the right thing. And the fact that Midna is constantly belittling you doesn't make you feel better about letting her hold on to them. That uncertainty culminates as you revive the final spirit, who gives you not just a warning, but a full description of the fused shadow's origins in one of the most disturbing cutscenes ever produced. It's trippy, confusing, and downright terrifying. And the inclusion of Shadow Link is a grim reminder of what happens to those who are corrupted by power. But this time, it seems that you can only fight Shadow with Shadow. And so you claim the final piece of the puzzle, ever conscious of the dark powers you are bringing together. You unfortunately must confront that power a little bit sooner than you would have wanted. As you return from the Lakebed Temple and start to wonder what you're supposed to do next, you're suddenly faced with Zant, the King of Twilight. With seemingly no effort, Zant pushes you back, knocks out the Spirit of Light, and brings both the Twilight and your wolf form into his presence. His interest, however, is on Midna. With aggressive taunts and disturbing words, Zant accuses Midna of betrayal and urges her to join him in his conquest of the light. But whether just out of hatred for Zant, or perhaps out of a modicum of concern for you, Midna refuses his offer, and Zant responds by reminding Midna just how separate she is from the world of light. Well do I remember my first encounter with this scene. Up to this point, Midna had been arrogant, taunting, manipulative, and bossy. Pretty much everything you would expect a conceited bully to be, and hardly anything that would make her pleasant to be around. Only in the last few sentences before this encounter had she expressed any kind of civility towards me. And you could barely even call it that. I would have been happy to see her go and never see her again. And yet here she was, bleached white and clinging to life. And I cared. I cared a lot. With rain pouring down, you traverse the sewers of Hyrule, move back through the castle, and return again to Princess Zelda. Midna, gasping for breath, is suddenly meek and pleading, speaking like someone who is certain that they are going to die. She directs Link to head on his own to Faron Forest after the Master Sword, and then to find the Mirror of Twilight. Zelda, in her wisdom and kindness, begins to understand who Midna is, and elects to take Midna's place in the shadows. Without another word, Zelda fades away, and Midna stands revived, able to accompany you on your quest for the sword. What follows is another trip of sorts down memory lane, but in more ways than one. The Master Sword, once again lying deep in the Lost Woods amidst the Skull Kid and the tones of Saria's song, is surrounded by ancient ruins that hint at a civilization long gone. After passing by the final centuries and claiming the sacred blade, you are eventually led to the desert, and Midna reveals her people's history and the history of Twilight. It's an interesting story, one that upends our traditional view of the good versus evil narrative. In most stories, the evil forces are defeated and good triumphs. But rarely do we consider the fate of those who must deal with the consequences of those evildoers. Midna hails from a world forever banished to the Twilight, an entire civilization living in the shadows, not because of their actions, but those of their forebearers. It's a civilization that appears to have lived quite peacefully before Zant launched his takeover. But Zant himself appears to have an external source of power, and the sages that you meet in the Arbiter's grounds speak of that source, a demon thief wielding power only granted by the gods. At this point, it's probably a little appropriate to roll your eyes at yet another shoehorning of Ganondorf into what could have been a perfectly good standalone villain in Zant. But unlike Four Swords Adventures, an actual need for a power like Ganondorf's is given to us. The power of Twilight actually proves to be quite immense, requiring a usurper like Zant to need a different, more powerful magic in order to carry out his coup. In order to stop that power from growing, you need to get to the Twilight Realm, and that's accomplished by finding the Mirror of Twilight, which Zant had broken and scattered. Finding where the pieces are located is actually fairly easy, for not only do the sages tell you approximately where they are, you have a team at your back looking into ways to save Hyrule. Headed by Telma, this group investigates various troubles across the land, giving you indications of where to go next, advice on the next plan of action, and a friendly face to give you motivation to move forward. With their help, you're able to finish exploring the entirety of Hyrule and locate the mirror pieces. These newer dungeons, fully parting ways with the nostalgia of the first levels, take great liberty in experimenting with dungeon design. The Arbiter's grounds create two separate sections leading to a specific destination, instead of just warping you to the front when you beat the boss. The Temple of Time is a seemingly simple back and forth trail with an escort mission, while the sprawling mansion in Snow Peak is essentially an open environment. The City in the Sky is the closest to a traditional dungeon, but it messes with altitude even more than Wind Waker did. Such unique dungeon layouts give rise to some truly unique items. Tools like the ball and chain and the Dominion Rod create a plethora of opportunities for ingenious puzzles and combat. They're a little too unique, however, and they get exceptionally limited use outside of their respective dungeons. There's still plenty to do, however, and with each problem solved, you feel as if you're truly bringing Hyrule back from the brink. The more you explore and interact with the people around you, the more that feeling becomes reality. From giving the Zora Prince realist the confidence to return home, to helping establish the strangest marketing phenomenon ever conceived, your efforts are truly bringing light back into people's lives. There are two examples of this that are a bit more personal. The first is young Colin, a timid boy who is relentlessly teased by the other boys in Ordon. The effort he goes through to show bravery, help around Kakariko, and finally return his friends home is a lesson in character development that isn't just good for the story, it's also satisfying for you. For while he can seem a bit corny at times, you can't help but like the kid, partially because he looks up to you. The confrontation on the Great Bridge is one of the most dramatic moments of the game, and it's fueled by your determination to help the one who's trying to be like you. The second revolves around Ilia, who in the terrors following her abduction has lost her memory. Very rarely do we see a romantic subplot in a Zelda game, and this one is painted over every interaction you have with her. The sadness on Link's face as he watches Ilia's inability to recognize him as a parent. And there are so many moments when it looks like Ilia might remember something that you just want her to return to normal. The moment where she finally recovers those loving memories of you is very touching indeed. Whether Ilia herself is a good character, however, is a bit debatable. By having an amnesia plot, we don't get all that much time to spend with the real Ilia. And what time we do spend with her is centered around Epona. So, while we know that Link cares for her, we as players don't necessarily feel the same, which lessens her impact. Additionally, with a commanding personality like Midna always by your side, and Princess Zelda holding a place in our hearts despite her secondary position, Ilia easily gets pushed to the side in favor of more charismatic characters. Midna in particular is a captivating figure, and arguably the best companion we have ever had. Although she isn't as free with information as Navi or Fi, that may have actually worked in her favor, as what she does say is simply dripping with personality. Being able to make you care about such a mocking, arrogant imp is certainly an accomplishment, but after seeing the sacrifices you and Zelda have made to save Hyrule, and especially Midna herself, she makes a dramatic change. Her personality is still in full force, but her spite and hatred almost completely vanish, letting her charm and wit take center stage. She's also more willing to reveal her insecurities. Her telling of her people's history and her own personal struggle is blunt and honest. Before you enter the Mirror of Twilight, it is finally revealed that Midna herself is the Twilight Princess. It was a term she used to address Zelda early on, and at the time, it seemed little more than a mockery of Zelda's captivity. Now, we see it as Midna's official title, her self-admitted failure, and her motivation from the very beginning. A motivation that has grown and deepened as she's traveled with you. Diving into the Mirror's portal and traveling to the Castle of Twilight, you are met with a cursed land, shadow beasts, and staticky doppelgangers of Zant. But there are also glimmers of hope, as the soul lights of Twilight are eventually absorbed by the Master Sword, giving it an ethereal glow that cuts through the darkness Zant has conjured. Traveling through the annexes and up the main keep, you finally make it to Zant himself. And this is where things get strange. Xant's design was always very imposing, otherworldly, and pretty darn scary. A fitting image for an invading king of Twilight. But then, as the mask comes off and Xant reveals how he came upon Ganondorf and gained his power, the facade lifts, revealing not just a usurper, but a zealot, a devoted follower of Ganondorf's aura and malice, and ultimately a crazed madman who is both dangerous and unpredictable. When he's finally defeated, his insanity reaches alarming levels before Midna finally eliminates him. Unfortunately, Ganondorf has already returned to Hyrule, taking up residence in the castle. Utilizing your courage and wisdom in the courtyards, you're able to enter the castle itself, exerting all your power as you defeat the final guards and enter the ruined throne room. Zelda, alive yet unconscious, hangs suspended like a trophy, and sitting on the throne, the demon thief himself. Unlike his devoted priest, Ganondorf in this game is probably the most collected, most imposing, maybe even the most charismatic he has ever been. While Wind Waker's Ganondorf gave us an almost sympathetic character, bound by a harsh upbringing and a longing for ages past, the demon of Twilight Princess is every bit the malicious, intimidating king of darkness that we could ever hope to have, treating power as the ultimate goal and willing to annihilate everything in his path to obtain it. Your battle with him this time is the most grueling it has ever been. Through fighting a possessed Zelda, the beast Ganon, and Ganondorf himself, you have 4 different phases of combat, requiring all of your skill with sword, horse, and your wolf form. It's a marathon of a fight with no indication that your foe will ever fall, as he shakes off your blade, Zelda's light arrows, and even apparently killing Midna. As you finally end the demon, the Master Sword impaled where the Sage's sword had struck him so long ago, Ganondorf holds one brief image of Xant, who breaks, breaking him as well. With Ganondorf dead, his magic falls as well, and the Spirits of Light return one last time to bring back a revived Midna, who is no longer quite how we remember her. As she stands, her true form as Princess of the Twilight is graceful and stunning. Yet, when she opens her mouth, it's still the same sassy companion we've had this entire time. The imp who once scoffed at the world of light, now standing brightly against the rising sun. It's amazing how that happens sometimes. A person who you think is one thing, even with ample evidence that they are, over time changes and grows, becoming something almost completely different. And not only have they changed, but you've changed yourself, realizing that your preconceived notions as to what is light and what is dark may in fact just be shades of gray. To learn what is truly right and wrong and what may just be different takes a level of courage that far too few are willing to reach, and what may separate true heroes from just another warrior. As the 2 princesses converse next to the Mirror of Twilight, both appear to recognize this fact, with the understanding that light and shadow, no matter what we try, are inseparably connected, and to attempt to dominate one with the other leads only to chaos and destruction. While the Spirits of Light did end the Shadow Warriors' attempt to dominate the world, their actions caused the exile of a people who were blameless, producing those like Xant who resented the light, which in turn created the very crisis we were called to resolve. Perhaps that's why Midna decided to destroy the mirror. It wasn't a choice she wanted to make, but for both Twilight and for Hyrule, it was time to let old resentments die, and begin again with the knowledge that no matter how things may be now, there's always the possibility that things can change, things can improve, and we can always find another way to make ourselves and the world better. As a game, Twilight Princess is almost always compared to Ocarina of Time, and it has every right to be. The newer title was created partially in response to the fandom's insistence that Ocarina's style was the best direction to take. But while the two games are very similar to each other, Twilight Princess made sure to leave its mark, reminding us of what we enjoyed about Ocarina of Time, then taking its own path in its quest to show us what it takes to become a hero. All of the Zelda games have a theme of growth. The growth of an innocent youth into a fully realized hero. Ocarina of Time takes growth in a literal sense, spanning 7 years to give both a young and an adult Link. Twilight Princess, on the other hand, shows growth in its characters, teaching us that time isn't the only factor in growing. It's also the courage to act, the wisdom to learn, and the power to change yourself as you learn how to handle different situations, different people, and come to realize that your view may not necessarily be the truth. Growth in life involves overcoming adversity, but more than that, we grow in response to others, understanding their struggles and helping them grow. Not everyone changes so readily, but given time and courage, a hero can learn to understand that change and become all the better because of it. Whether it's gaining the strength to surpass our own weaknesses, or perhaps learning to respect someone different than ourselves. Someone like a tiny, rude, selfish jerk of an imp who became the fierce, determined, and truly wonderful Twilight Princess. Thanks everyone for coming along with me in Twilight Princess. I'm trying to cover as much as I can, but there is still way too much that we can talk about here. Be sure to leave a comment about your favorite parts in this game. Again, a big thank you to Nari, Sensuke, and Adam for coming along on my recent playthrough. If you want to see our foray into the Twilight, you can check the link in the description. If you're new and you want to see where this adventure has been, you can check out the playlist of the previous Zelda tributes in the description as well. And if you want to see where we head next, please subscribe and join us on the adventure. Join me next time as we make our return to the sea and put our courage to the test in The Legend of Zelda: Phantom Hourglass. See you soon.